The dusty trading post smelled of old leather and desperation. When Rose Lancaster's father laid her life on a worn wooden counter and walked away with a 20-pound bag of flour tucked under his arm. Rose stood frozen in the dim light filtering through the cracked windows, her worn calico dress hanging loose on her thin frame, watching the only family she had ever known disappear through the doorway without a backward glance. She was 19 years old, and in that moment, she understood that her worth to Frank Lancaster had always been measured in practical terms. A daughter was useful until she became a burden, and 3 years of failed crops in southern Utah had turned her into the latter. "Well now," said Cyrus Dalton, the trading post owner, rubbing his grizzled chin as he looked her up and down like she was livestock. "I suppose I got myself an extra pair of hands around here. You can sweep and cook and keep things tidy. Sleep in the back room." Rose wanted to speak, wanted to protest, wanted to scream that she was a human being and not a commodity to be bartered. But the words stuck in her throat like thorns. She had learned long ago that words only brought her father's backhand, and silence was safer than defiance. So she nodded, her chestnut hair falling across her face to hide the tears that threatened to spill. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and humiliation. Dalton worked her from dawn until long after dark, and his eyes followed her in ways that made her skin crawl. She scrubbed floors until her hands bled, cooked meals from meager supplies, and tried to make herself as invisible as possible in the cramped quarters of the trading post. Circleville, Utah was a small settlement on the edge of nowhere, and Rose quickly learned that nobody cared about the girl who had been traded for flour. It was a Tuesday morning in late September of 1882, when Vincent Cole rode into town on a dusty Appaloosa mare, his saddlebags bulging with supplies from a cattle drive that had taken him all the way to Colorado and back. He was 24 years old, tall and lean with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were the color of a summer sky, and when he smiled, which was not often, it softened the hard edges that months on the trail had carved into his face. Vincent had heard about Dalton's trading post from other ranch hands, though the reports were never favorable. The man was known for sharp dealing and questionable ethics, but his post was the only place for 50 miles where a cowboy could stock up on coffee, tobacco, and other necessities without riding all the way to Panguitch. Vincent needed ammunition and a new canteen, and he figured he could tolerate Dalton's company long enough to make his purchases. The interior of the trading post was darker than expected, and it took Vincent's eyes a moment to adjust from the bright Utah sunshine. When they did, he saw Dalton behind the counter and a young woman standing on a ladder, straining to reach a high shelf stacked with canned goods. She was too thin, her dress patched and faded, but there was something about the determined set of her shoulders that caught his attention. "Need ammunition for a Winchester repeater," Vincent said, setting his worn hat on the counter. "And a canteen. Mine sprung a leak somewhere between here and the Colorado border." Dalton nodded, but before he could move, the ladder shifted beneath the young woman's feet. Vincent moved without thinking, crossing the space in 3 long strides and catching her as she fell. For a moment, Rose was suspended in a stranger's arms, and when she looked up into his face, she saw something she had almost forgotten existed: genuine concern. "You all right, miss?" Vincent asked, setting her carefully on her feet but keeping one hand on her elbow, until he was sure she had her balance. Rose nodded, her heart hammering in her chest for reasons that had nothing to do with the fall. Up close, she could see the kindness in this cowboy's blue eyes, and it was so unexpected that she found herself momentarily speechless. "She's fine," Dalton said dismissively. "Girls clumsy is all. Now about that ammunition." Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly, but he released Rose and returned to the counter. As Dalton gathered his supplies, Vincent found his gaze drifting back to the young woman, who had picked up a broom and was sweeping the area where she had fallen, her movements quick and nervous. There was a purple bruise on her forearm, half hidden by her sleeve, and another fading yellow one on her collarbone. "That your daughter?" Vincent asked, though he had a feeling he already knew the answer. Dalton laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Might as well be. Her father traded her to me for a bag of flour a couple weeks back. Figure she works off her value in labor, then maybe I will find someone who wants a wife. Not much to look at, but she can cook decent enough." Vincent's jaw tightened, and his hand curled into a fist on the counter. He had seen a lot of hard things in his years working cattle across the West, had witnessed poverty and desperation in forms that would break a weaker man's spirit. But there was something about the casual cruelty in Dalton's voice, the way he spoke about another human being like she was nothing more than a work animal, that ignited a slow, burning anger in Vincent's chest. "How much?" Vincent heard himself ask. Dalton looked up from counting out bullets. "How much what?" "How much for her freedom?" Rose's broom stilled in her hands, and she lifted her head slowly, afraid to hope. Dalton's eyes gleamed with the calculating look of a man who sensed profit. "Well now, that's an interesting question. I paid a whole bag of flour for her, 20 pounds of good wheat flour. Cost me near about $3. Then there's the food she has eaten since, the roof over her head. Plus there is the matter of future value. Once I get her fattened up a bit, I could probably marry her off for a fair sum." Vincent pulled out his wallet, a worn leather thing that held the wages from 6 months of brutal work. "I've got $40 here. That is more than fair for what you paid plus your trouble. Make it 50 and you got a deal." "I've got $42.30, Vincent said evenly. "That is what I am offering. You can take it, or I can ride out to the marshal in Panguitch and have a conversation about the legality of human trafficking in the territory of Utah." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dalton's face flushed red, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. There were laws against slavery, even if they were not always enforced in remote places like Circleville. A federal marshal asking questions would be bad for business. "Fine," Dalton spat. "Take her. But the moment she leaves this building, she is not my concern anymore." Vincent counted out the money carefully, placing each bill and coin on the counter with deliberate precision. Then he turned to Rose, who stood frozen by the far wall, the broom still clutched in her white-knuckled hands. "Miss," he said gently, "I know you have got no reason to trust me, but I promise you I mean you no harm. I have got a ranch about 15 miles north of here, and I could use help with cooking and general housekeeping. It is honest work for honest wages, and you would have your own space in the bunkhouse. If you would rather I take you somewhere else, to family or friends, I will do that instead. Choice is yours." Rose stared at him, trying to process what had just happened. Freedom had been so far from her mind that she had almost forgotten what the word meant. And now this stranger, this cowboy with kind eyes and a weathered face, was offering it to her like it was something she deserved. "I've got no family," she said quietly, her voice rough from disuse. "No friends neither. My pa is the one who traded me here, and my ma died when I was 12. There is no place else for me to go." "Then come with me," Vincent said. "I promise you will be treated with respect. You will earn fair wages, and when you have got enough saved, if you want to move on to somewhere else, I will not stop you. You have got my word on that." Rose looked at Dalton, who was counting the money with greedy fingers, then back at Vincent. She had learned to read men over the years, to sense the danger that lurked beneath polite words. But when she looked at this cowboy, she saw only sincerity. It might have been foolish to trust, but what choice did she have? Stay with Dalton and face a future of abuse and eventual forced marriage, or take a chance on a stranger who had just paid more than she ever thought she was worth? "I will come with you," she said, setting down the broom. "You got any belongings you need to collect?" Rose almost laughed at that. Everything she owned could fit in her 2 hands. "Just a shawl in the back room. Go get it. I will wait here." When Rose disappeared into the back, Dalton leaned across the counter, his breath stinking of tobacco and whiskey. "You are making a mistake, Cole. That girl is not worth the trouble. Broken spirit, barely speaks and eats like a bird. You just wasted your money." Vincent met his gaze steadily. "A man's worth is not measured by how he treats those who can help him, but by how he treats those who cannot. You might want to think on that before the good Lord comes calling for an accounting of your deeds." Rose returned a moment later with a threadbare shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and Vincent gestured toward the door. As they stepped out into the September sunshine, Rose took her first breath as a free woman and felt dizzy with the magnitude of it. Vincent's horse was tied at the hitching post, and beside it was a pack mule loaded with supplies. He untied both animals and handed Rose the mule's lead rope. "You know how to ride." "Used to," Rose said, "but we sold our horses 3 years back when the drought started." "Well, this is Sadie," Vincent said, patting the mule's neck. "She is gentle as they come. We have got about 3 hours of riding ahead of us, but we can take it slow. You let me know if you need to rest." They left Circleville behind, following a dusty trail that wound through the red rock landscape of southern Utah. The sun was warm but not oppressive, and the vast expanse of sky overhead seemed to stretch on forever. Rose, who had spent the last weeks confined to the dim interior of the trading post, found herself drinking in the sight of the open land with something close to desperation. Vincent rode in silence for the first hour, giving Rose space to process what had happened. He had not planned on becoming responsible for another human being when he woke up that morning, but he could not bring himself to regret the impulse that had prompted him to offer that money. His own mother had died when he was young, and he had watched his father struggle to raise 3 sons alone. Vincent knew what it was like to be vulnerable, to need help and have nowhere to turn. If he could spare one person that particular brand of suffering, it seemed like money well spent. "Can I ask you something?" Rose's voice was quiet, barely audible over the sound of hoofbeats on packed earth. "Of course. Why did you do it? You do not know me. I could be trouble, could be more burden than help. Why spend your money on a stranger?" Vincent considered the question carefully before answering. "My pa used to say that we are all just walking each other home. This world is hard enough without us making it harder on each other. You were in trouble, and I had the means to help. Did not seem like something that required much thinking. Most men would not see it that way." "Then most men are fools," Vincent said simply. They rode on as the sun climbed higher in the sky, passing through landscapes that ranged from red rock canyons to high desert scrubland dotted with juniper and sagebrush. Vincent pointed out landmarks along the way, explaining the territory with the easy knowledge of a man who had spent years learning every inch of it. Rose listened, fascinated despite her exhaustion. She had lived her whole life within a 20-mile radius, had never traveled beyond the boundaries of her father's failed farm and the town of Circleville. This felt like discovering a whole new world. When they finally arrived at Vincent's ranch, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The ranch was modest but well maintained, consisting of a main house, a barn, a chicken coop, and a bunkhouse. Cattle grazed in the near pasture, and Rose could see the glint of water from a creek that ran along the property's eastern edge. "It is not much," Vincent said, dismounting and tying his horse to the fence. "But it is honest land, bought with honest wages. I have been building this place for 3 years now, ever since I saved enough from ranch work to buy the property." Rose slid down from the mule, her legs shaky after the long ride. "It looks like paradise to me." Vincent smiled at that, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "Well, let me show you around properly. Main house is over there. I've got 2 rooms, a kitchen, and a sitting area. Nothing fancy, but the roof does not leak. Bunkhouse is where you will stay. I had a couple of ranch hands helping out earlier this summer, but they moved on to find work elsewhere. You will have the whole place to yourself." He led her to the bunkhouse, a sturdy wooden structure with 4 beds, a stove, and a small table. It was clean and simple, with windows that let in plenty of light. To Rose, who had been sleeping on a thin mattress in a windowless back room at the trading post, it looked like luxury. "There is a pump out back for water," Vincent continued. "And if you want a proper bath, I've got a tub in the main house you are welcome to use. Just let me know, and I will heat up water for you. As for work, I mainly need help with cooking and general housekeeping. I am not much of a cook myself, tend to live on beans and hardtack when I am left to my own devices. I have also got chickens that need tending, and the garden could use some attention. I have been so busy with the cattle that I have let it go to seed." "That sounds manageable," Rose said. "What about wages? How does $8 a month sound, plus room and board?" "That is what I paid the ranch hands, and it seems fair for the same kind of work." Rose's eyes widened. $8 a month was more money than she had ever had in her life. Her father had never paid her anything for her labor, viewing her work as simple obligation. The idea that she would be compensated, treated like a legitimate employee rather than property, was almost too much to comprehend. "That is more than generous," she managed. "It is what the work is worth," Vincent corrected gently. "Now you must be tired and hungry. Why don't you get settled in here and I will rustle up some dinner? Nothing fancy, just beans and bacon, but it will fill the empty spaces." He left her alone then, and Rose sat down on one of the beds, her hands trembling in her lap. Everything had changed so fast that she felt unmoored, like a boat torn loose from its anchor in a storm. But as she looked around the clean bunkhouse with its solid walls and real beds, as she thought about the kind cowboy who had paid $42.30 for her freedom, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to identify it, but when she did, tears sprang to her eyes. Hope. She was feeling hope for the first time in years. After allowing herself a brief moment to cry, Rose washed her face at the pump and made her way to the main house. Vincent was at the stove, stirring a pot of beans and frying bacon in a cast-iron skillet. The smell made her stomach clench with hunger, reminding her that Dalton had only fed her once a day, usually scraps that he did not want for himself. "Can I help?" she asked from the doorway. Vincent glanced over his shoulder. "You can set the table if you want. Plates are in that cupboard, utensils in the drawer below." They worked in companionable silence, and when the food was ready, Vincent dished out generous portions onto both plates. Rose stared at the amount of food in front of her, more than she had seen in weeks, and felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Something wrong?" Vincent asked, noticing her expression. "No," Rose said quickly. "It is just a lot of food. I am not used to it." Vincent's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "Well, you are going to need your strength for the work ahead. Eat as much as you can manage. They ate together at the small kitchen table, and Vincent kept up a steady stream of conversation about the ranch, the cattle, and the land. He told her about his plans to expand the herd next spring, about the challenges of ranching in Utah territory, about the neighbors who lived 10 miles to the east and helped out during branding season. Rose listened and ate, contributing little to the conversation but absorbing every word like a sponge. When the meal was finished, Vincent insisted on washing the dishes himself. "You have had a long day. Get some rest and we will figure out a proper routine tomorrow." Rose wanted to protest, to insist that she should start earning her keep immediately, but the exhaustion of the day was catching up with her. She thanked him quietly and made her way back to the bunkhouse as the last light faded from the sky. That night, lying in a real bed with clean sheets and a roof over her head, Rose cried herself to sleep. But these tears were different from the ones she had shed in Dalton's trading post. These were tears of release, of grief for all the years of hardship, and of tentative joy for the possibility of something better. The days that followed fell into a pattern that was both strange and wonderful to Rose. She woke before dawn and made her way to the main house, where she prepared breakfast for herself and Vincent. He always thanked her, always treated her with respect and consideration. After breakfast, she cleaned the house, tended the chickens, and worked in the garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil. In the afternoons, she prepared dinner, and they ate together while Vincent told her stories about his days working on various ranches across the West. He had been born in Texas, Vincent told her, the youngest of 3 sons. His mother had died of fever when he was 8, and his father had raised the boys while working as a ranch foreman. Vincent had learned everything about cattle and horses from his father and older brothers, and by the time he was 16, he was working full-time on one of the biggest ranches in Texas. He had spent the next several years moving from place to place, saving every penny he could until he finally had enough to buy this piece of land in Utah. In turn, Rose began to share her own story. It came out in fragments at first, small pieces of information revealed over dinners, and during quiet moments working in the garden together. She told him about her mother, who had been kind and gentle and who had died too young. She told him about her father, who had grown increasingly bitter as crop after crop failed, who had turned to drinking, and who had taken out his frustrations on his daughter. She told him about the hunger, the loneliness, and finally, the terrible morning when her father had led her to Dalton's trading post and traded her away like she was livestock. Vincent listened to all of it without judgment, his blue eyes reflecting a deep well of compassion that Rose had never encountered before. He never interrupted, never tried to minimize her pain or offer platitudes about how things would get better. He simply listened, and in doing so, gave her the gift of being truly seen for the first time in her life. As the weeks passed, and September gave way to October, Rose began to notice changes in herself. She was eating regularly now, and her body was regaining the weight it had lost during the lean years. Her hands, which had been cracked and bleeding from hard labor at the trading post, began to heal. But more than the physical changes, she noticed something shifting inside her heart. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long was beginning to fade, replaced by a tentative sense of security. And something else was growing too, something she was almost afraid to name. She found herself thinking about Vincent at odd moments throughout the day, remembering the way his face crinkled when he smiled, the deep timbre of his voice when he sang while working with the horses, the gentleness of his hands when he helped her lift heavy pots or reach high shelves. She told herself it was simply gratitude, a natural response to his kindness. But she knew deep down, that it was something more. Vincent, for his part, was discovering that having Rose on the ranch had changed his life in ways he had not anticipated. The house was cleaner, the meals were better, and the daily tasks that had felt like drudgery now seemed lighter somehow. But it was more than just the practical improvements. He found himself looking forward to dinner each night, to the conversations they shared, to the sound of her laughter when he told a particularly ridiculous story about his misadventures as a young cowboy. Rose was smart and funny when she let her guard down, and beneath the scars of her past, Vincent could see a strength of spirit that took his breath away. He tried to ignore the growing attraction he felt, reminding himself that Rose was his employee, that she was vulnerable, that she needed safety and stability rather than complications. But it was hard to ignore the way his heart lifted when she smiled, or the protective surge he felt whenever she mentioned her past. Vincent Cole had never been a man who believed in love at first sight, but he was beginning to suspect that love could sneak up on a person when they were not paying attention. It was a crisp morning in late October when everything changed. Rose was in the chicken coop collecting eggs when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching the ranch. Her first instinct was fear, a conditioned response from years of learning that strangers rarely brought good news. She clutched the basket of eggs to her chest and peered out through the coop door. 3 men on horseback were riding up to the main house. Even from a distance, Rose recognized the man in the lead. Frank Lancaster, her father, looking as weathered and bitter as the day he had traded her away. Her heart began to pound and her legs felt weak. Vincent emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" "Looking for my daughter," Frank Lancaster said, not bothering to dismount. "Heard she might be working on this ranch. Name is Rose Lancaster." "And you would be her father?" "That's right. Come to take her home where she belongs." Vincent's voice was steady, but Rose could hear the steel beneath it. "Rose is a grown woman and an employee of this ranch. If she wants to go with you, that is her choice." "But I am not in the habit of turning over my employees to anyone without their consent." Frank's face reddened. "She is my daughter, and she has got responsibilities to her family. I made a mistake trading her to Dalton, and I am here to make it right." "By make it right, do you mean you have got the bag of flour you are planning to return to him?" Vincent asked dryly. "You watch your mouth, boy. I am her father." "Being a father is about more than blood," Vincent said. "It is about caring for your children, protecting them, treating them with love and respect. From what Rose has told me, you have done none of those things. So I will ask you one more time to leave my property, and if Rose decides she wants to see you, that will be her decision to make." Frank Lancaster's hand moved toward the gun at his hip, and Vincent tensed, his own hand hovering near his weapon. The 2 men who had accompanied Frank shifted in their saddles, looking uncomfortable. They were neighbors of Frank's, probably roped into this errand with promises of whiskey or help with their own farms. They had not signed up for a gunfight. It was at that moment that Rose stepped out of the chicken coop, still carrying her basket of eggs. Her legs were shaking, but her voice was clear and strong. "I am not going with you." Frank turned in his saddle to look at her, and Rose saw surprise flicker across his face. She looked different now, healthier and stronger, and there was something in her bearing that had not been there before. Dignity, perhaps, or self-respect. "Rose, you get yourself over here right now. You are my daughter and you will do as I say." "No," Rose said simply. "You traded away any claim to me when you sold me for a bag of flour. I've got a good situation here, honest work and fair pay. I am not leaving. I will drag you home if I have to." Vincent moved then, positioning himself between Frank and Rose. "You will not lay a hand on her. She has made her choice clear. Now you and your friends need to ride off this property before I go fetch the marshal." Frank's face twisted with rage, but even through his anger, he was sober enough to do the math. 3 against 1 might have seemed like good odds, but his 2 companions were already backing their horses away, clearly wanting no part of this confrontation. And Vincent Cole had the look of a man who knew how to handle himself in a fight. "This is not over," Frank spat. "She is my blood and I have got rights." "Your rights ended when you traded her like she was property," Vincent said coldly. "Now get off my land before I lose my patience." Frank Lancaster pulled his horse around sharply and spurred it into a gallop, his companions following close behind. They disappeared down the trail in a cloud of dust, leaving Rose and Vincent standing in the yard, the tension draining from the air like water from a broken dam. Rose's legs finally gave out and she sank to her knees, the basket of eggs falling from her hands. Vincent was beside her in an instant, his arms coming around her shoulders to steady her. "It is all right," he murmured. "He is gone. You are safe. What if he comes back?" Rose asked, her voice shaking. "What if he brings more men or goes to the law and claims I am his property?" "Utah is a territory, not a slave state," Vincent said firmly. "You are 19 years old, a legal adult. No law in this land says you have to go with him. And if he comes back, we will handle it. I will ride into Panguitch tomorrow and talk to the marshal, make sure he knows the situation. You are under my protection now, Rose. I will not let anyone hurt you." Rose turned to look at him, and in that moment, with his arms around her and his blue eyes filled with concern, she knew with absolute certainty that she had fallen in love with Vincent Cole. It was not gratitude, not simple appreciation for his kindness. It was something deeper, something that reached into the core of who she was and recognized him as the person she wanted to stand beside for the rest of her life. "Why?" she asked, the word coming out as barely more than a whisper. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Vincent's hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle as a prayer. "Because you are worth more than all the gold out west, Rose Lancaster. And it is about time someone told you that." The words hung in the air between them, and Rose felt tears sliding down her cheeks. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way Vincent was looking at her now, like she was something precious and valuable and deserving of care. "I do not know how to be worth that much," she said brokenly. "Then I guess I will just have to keep telling you until you believe it," Vincent replied. And then, moving slowly to give her time to pull away if she wanted, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, and Rose felt something inside her chest crack open. All the years of loneliness, all the pain and fear and self-doubt seemed to pour out of that crack like poison from a wound. And in its place, something new began to grow. Love, yes, but also the beginning of healing. When they finally pulled apart, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I did not mean for that to happen so soon. I wanted to give you time, let you heal, not rush you into anything. But Rose, I need you to know that I have come to care for you deeply. More than is probably wise, considering you have only been here 6 weeks. If those feelings are not returned, I will respect that. You will always have a place here, always have employment and safety, regardless of how you feel about me. I do not want you to feel pressured or obligated." Rose pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "Vincent Cole, I have spent my whole life feeling worthless. And then you came into that trading post and paid $42.30 for my freedom, and you brought me here, and you treated me like I mattered. How could I not fall in love with you?" Vincent's face broke into a smile that could have lit up the darkest night. "Then I guess we are both in the same boat." "What do we do now?" Rose asked. "Now we take things one day at a time," Vincent said. We get to know each other properly. We build something real and lasting. And when the time is right, when you are ready, maybe we talk about making this arrangement permanent. Permanent, Rose Lancaster. I am talking about marriage. But I am not proposing yet, so do not go getting ahead of me. I am a traditional man, and when I ask you to be my wife, I want to do it proper, with a ring and everything. For now, let us just enjoy being two people who care about each other and see where this path leads us. Rose laughed, the sound bright and unfettered, and threw her arms around his neck. I think I can manage that. They spent the rest of that day in a state of joy that felt almost surreal to Rose. They worked together on the ranch, but now there was an ease between them that had not existed before, a comfort that came from having acknowledged their feelings. Vincent held her hand while they walked to check on the cattle, kissed her forehead when they parted for the evening, and looked at her like she hung the moon and stars in the sky. True to his word, Vincent rode into Panguitch the next morning to speak with Marshal Tom Hendricks. The marshal was a grizzled veteran of frontier law enforcement, a man who had seen enough trouble to fill several lifetimes. He listened to Vincent's story with a frown, making notes in a worn leather journal. Frank Lancaster, you say? I know the man. He has got a reputation for drinking and making poor decisions. If he comes back and causes trouble on your property, you send word and I will ride out. But you are right about the law. Miss Lancaster is an adult, and she has every right to choose where she lives and works. Her father has got no claim on her. What if he tries to claim she owes him for her upbringing, some kind of debt? Marshal Hendricks shook his head. That is not how the law works in Utah Territory. A parent does not get to bill their children for raising them. If Frank keeps pushing this, he might find himself in legal trouble for the stunt he pulled at Dalton's trading post. Trading a human being, even your own daughter, is not something the territorial courts look kindly on. Vincent felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He thanked the marshal and headed back to the ranch, stopping in town long enough to buy a few supplies, and, after some deliberation, a book of poetry he had seen in the general store window. Rose had mentioned once that she loved reading, but her father had sold her mother's books years ago for drinking money. It seemed like a small thing, but Vincent wanted to give her back some of the joy that had been taken from her. When he returned to the ranch, Rose was in the kitchen preparing lunch. She turned when she heard him come in, her face lighting up in a way that made his heart clench. How did it go with the marshal? Good. He says your father has got no legal claim on you, and if he comes back, the marshal will handle it. Vincent set down his saddlebags and pulled out the book. I also got you something. Rose took the book with trembling hands, running her fingers over the embossed cover. It was a collection of poems by various authors, the pages crisp and new. Vincent, this is too much. It is a gift, he said softly. You do not have to earn gifts, Rose. Sometimes people just give them because they care. She set the book down carefully on the table and kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and love into that single gesture. Vincent wrapped his arms around her and held her close, thinking that this right here, was what he had been searching for all those years of wandering across the West. Not gold or glory, but a place to call home and a woman to share it with. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Rose's life. She and Vincent fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. They worked together during the day, maintained their separate sleeping quarters at night, and spent their evenings talking, reading, and simply enjoying each other's company. Vincent was courting her properly, with all the old-fashioned gestures that Rose had read about but never experienced. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow, carved her a beautiful wooden box to keep her small treasures in, and treated her with a respect that never wavered. As November arrived and the weather turned colder, Rose found herself thinking about the future in ways she never had before. For so long, she had simply survived day to day, unable to imagine anything beyond the immediate struggle to stay alive. But now, with Vincent, she could picture a real life. She could imagine holidays celebrated together, children running through the ranch, growing old beside someone who loved her. It was a Sunday afternoon in mid-November when Vincent asked her to take a walk with him. They bundled up against the cold and made their way to a spot overlooking the ranch, where the land spread out below them like a patchwork quilt of browns and golds. The sun was low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber. "Rose," Vincent said, taking her hand in his. "I know I said I wanted to wait to take our time, but I have been thinking, and I do not see the point in waiting when I already know what I want. I want you, every day for the rest of my life. I want to wake up next to you and fall asleep holding you. I want to build a family with you, grow old with you, and whatever time the good Lord gives us on this earth, I want to spend it at your side." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple but beautiful, a thin gold band with a small ruby set in the center. "This was my mother's ring. My father gave it to me before he died, told me to give it to a woman who was worth cherishing. Rose Lancaster, you are worth more than all the gold in the West. Will you marry me?" Rose looked at the ring, at Vincent's earnest face, at the ranch spread out below them bathed in golden light. A year ago, she could never have imagined this moment. 6 weeks ago, she had been a slave in all but name, traded for a bag of flour and worked like an animal. And now here she was, being offered love and a future by a man who saw her worth when no one else had. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I will marry you, Vincent Cole." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Then he kissed her and Rose felt like she was flying. This was what happiness felt like. This was what it meant to be loved. They were married 3 weeks later in Panguitch, with Marshall Hendricks and his wife serving as witnesses. Rose wore a simple dress of sky blue cotton that Vincent had bought for her, and she carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers. It was not a fancy wedding, but it was honest and heartfelt, and when the circuit preacher pronounced them man and wife, Rose felt like the richest woman in the world. The ride back to the ranch as Mrs. Rose Cole was surreal. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. She was no longer an employee or a guest or a woman seeking refuge. She was home, with a husband who loved her and a future full of possibilities. That night, in the main house that was now truly theirs, Vincent held her close and whispered promises in her ear. He promised to always treat her with respect, to cherish her for the rest of his days, to build a life with her that would erase the pain of her past. And Rose, who had spent so many years believing she was worthless, finally understood that she had always been deserving of love. It had just taken the right person to show her. The winter passed in a blur of contentment. They worked together to keep the ranch running, and Vincent taught Rose everything he knew about cattle and horses. She proved to be a quick learner, unafraid of hard work and eager to pull her weight. In the evenings, they read together by the fire, or Vincent played the harmonica while Rose sang. Her voice, hesitant at first, grew stronger with practice, and Vincent loved nothing more than hearing her sing old ballads and hymns. When spring arrived, Rose discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a little trepidation. They were young, and ranching was hard work, but they were in it together. Vincent became even more protective, insisting that Rose not overwork herself and taking on more of the heavy labor around the ranch. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Rose protested when he tried to carry a basket of laundry for her. "I know," Vincent said with a grin, "but humor me. I have got precious cargo to protect now." Their son was born in November of 1883, almost exactly a year after they were married. They named him Thomas, after Vincent's father, and he was perfect. Dark hair like his father, Rose's brown eyes, and a set of lungs that could wake the dead. Rose had been terrified during the pregnancy, worried that she would not know how to be a mother, that she would somehow pass on the pain of her own childhood. But the moment she held Thomas in her arms, all those fears evaporated. She loved this baby with a fierceness that surprised her, and she vowed that he would never know the hunger, fear, or neglect that had marked her own early years. Vincent was a devoted father, taking to the role with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. He fashioned a cradle from oak wood, carved with scenes of horses and cattle. He sang to Thomas when the baby was fussy, walked the floor with him in the middle of the night, and looked at his son with such love that it made Rose's heart ache. As Thomas grew from an infant into a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Vincent had expanded the herd, and they were earning enough to make real improvements to the property. They added a second bedroom to the main house, built a better barn, and even purchased a milk cow to provide fresh dairy for the family. Life was good, better than Rose had ever dared to dream. Frank Lancaster never returned to cause trouble. Marshal Hendricks informed them that Frank had left the area, heading west to Nevada in search of work. Rose felt no grief at his departure, only relief. She had let go of any lingering desire for her father's approval or love. Her family now consisted of Vincent, Thomas, and the life they were building together. When Thomas was 2 years old, Rose became pregnant again. This time, she faced the pregnancy with more confidence, knowing what to expect. Their daughter was born in the summer of 1886, a healthy baby girl with her father's blue eyes and a head full of dark curls. They named her Emily, after Rose's mother, and she was as sweet-tempered as her brother was rambunctious. The years passed in a rhythm of work and love. Thomas grew into a capable boy who loved helping his father with the cattle. Emily was bright and curious, constantly asking questions about everything she saw. Vincent and Rose worked side by side, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. They had arguments, of course, disagreements about money or child rearing or how to handle stubborn cattle. But they always talked things through, always came back to the foundation of love and respect that had been there from the beginning. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Rose back to the spot where he had proposed. The children were staying with a neighboring family for the night, giving them a rare evening alone. They sat on the hillside, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Rose asked quietly. "Spending that money on a stranger in a trading post. I know $42.30 was a lot of money back then." Vincent turned to look at her, and in the fading light, Rose could see the threads of silver beginning to appear in his dark hair. They were 34 and 29 years old now, no longer the young people who had met in Circleville all those years ago. But the love in his eyes had not diminished one bit. "Rose Cole, you are the best investment I ever made," he said firmly. "That money bought me a partner, a wife, a mother for my children, and my best friend. It bought me a life worth living. I would spend it again in a heartbeat." "I love you," Rose said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I do not think I say that enough." "You show it every day," Vincent replied. "In the way you care for our children, the way you work beside me, the way you smile when I come in from the fields, that is worth more than words." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. The same vast Utah sky that had witnessed their first meeting, their first kiss, and all the moments of joy and struggle that had followed. Rose thought about that desperate girl who had been traded for a bag of flour, who had believed she was worthless. That girl was gone now, replaced by a woman who knew her value, who had built a life of meaning and purpose. "You know what I think about sometimes," Rose said after a while. "I think about all the things that had to go wrong in my life to lead me to that trading post on that particular day. The drought, my mother's death, my father's cruelty. If even one of those things had been different, I might never have met you. And I know I should hate those things, should wish they had never happened. But I cannot quite bring myself to regret a path that led me here to this life with you." Vincent pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I used to think the same thing. About all the jobs I worked, all the places I traveled, saving every penny. It was hard and lonely, and there were times I wondered if it was worth it. But every choice I made led me to Circleville on that September day, led me to walk into that trading post and see you on that ladder. And Rose, I would live through every hard day all over again if it meant ending up right here with you." They stayed on that hillside until the stars filled the sky, talking about their children, their dreams for the future, and the ranch they had built together. When they finally made their way back to the house, Vincent carried Rose over the threshold like he had on their wedding night, making her laugh with delight. "We are too old for this kind of romance," she protested, though she made no move to be put down. "We will never be too old for romance," Vincent said firmly. "I aim to court you until my dying day, Rose Cole." The children grew, and the ranch continued to thrive. Thomas eventually took over much of the daily operations, proving to have his father's skill with cattle and horses. Emily married a schoolteacher from Panguitch, a kind man who reminded Rose a great deal of Vincent in his quiet strength. They gave Rose and Vincent 3 grandchildren who filled the ranch house with laughter and chaos. Through it all, Vincent and Rose remained each other's anchor. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated births and mourned deaths, and built a legacy that went far beyond the land they owned. They had created a family founded on love and respect, where children were cherished and every person's worth was recognized. On a warm summer evening in 1903, as they sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Rose took Vincent's hand in hers. They were both in their 50s now, their hair gray and their faces lined with the years. But when Rose looked at Vincent, she still saw the young cowboy who had walked into that trading post and changed her life. "You remember what you told me that first day?" Rose asked. "In the yard after my father came," Vincent smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I told you that you were worth more than all the gold out west. And I did not believe you. I could not understand why anyone would think that about me. And now—" Rose looked at the ranch, at the home they had built, at the family they had raised, at the man who had loved her faithfully for over 20 years. "Now, I know you were right. Not because of anything I did or accomplished, but because you taught me that every person has worth, just by virtue of being human. You taught me that I deserved love and respect, not because I earned it, but because I existed. That is the greatest gift anyone ever gave me." Vincent Cole. Vincent lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me just as much, Rose. You gave me a home, a family, and a reason to be better than I ever thought I could be. We saved each other, I think." As the sun set over the Utah landscape, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Rose and Vincent sat together in the comfortable silence of 2 people who had shared a lifetime. The girl who had been traded for a bag of flour was long gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth. And the lonely cowboy who had spent his best money on a stranger's freedom had found something more valuable than all the gold in the West. He had found love, and in loving, he had found home. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons changing and life unfolding in its natural course. Rose and Vincent grew older together, their hands becoming weathered from years of honest work, their bodies moving a bit slower, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming something rich and comfortable, like a well-worn saddle that fits perfectly. Thomas took on more responsibility for the ranch, and he proved to be as capable as his father had been. He married a woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and they added to the family with 4 children of their own. Emily and her husband James had moved into town where he taught at the schoolhouse, but they visited often, bringing their children to spend summers on the ranch where Emily had grown up. Vincent had taught all his grandchildren to ride, just as he had taught Thomas and Emily. He was patient with them, never raising his voice even when they struggled, always finding a way to encourage and guide. Rose watched him with these children and marveled at the man he was, at how different he was from her own father. Vincent proved every day that being a good man was a choice, not something determined by circumstances or hardship. In the autumn of 1908, Vincent began to slow down more noticeably. He was 58 years old, and a lifetime of hard work was beginning to take its toll. His joints ached in the mornings, and he tired more easily than he once had. Rose, at 53, felt the same wearing down of her body, though she tried not to let it show. They had lived good lives, full lives, but they were no longer young. One evening in early October, Vincent was out checking on the cattle when his horse stumbled in a prairie dog hole. Vincent was thrown, landing hard on the packed earth. Thomas, who had been riding with him, rushed to his father's side immediately. Vincent had broken his leg badly, and by the time they got him back to the house and sent for the doctor from Panguitch, the leg had swollen terribly. Rose sat by Vincent's bedside while the doctor set the bone, holding her husband's hand and murmuring words of comfort. The doctor was an older man who had been practicing medicine in the area for decades, and his face was grave when he finished his work. "The bone will heal," the doctor told them privately. "But at his age, there is always the risk of complications. Keep him off it completely for at least 6 weeks and watch for signs of infection or fever. If you see anything concerning, send for me immediately." Rose nodded, her throat tight with fear. She had known that someday they would face illness or injury, that nobody lived forever. But knowing it intellectually was different from facing the reality of Vincent injured and in pain. For the next several weeks, Rose barely left Vincent's side. She brought him meals, helped him with personal needs that would have embarrassed a lesser man, read to him from books and newspapers, and simply sat with him when he dozed. Thomas and Sarah managed the ranch, and Emily came out from town to help care for her father whenever she could spare the time. Vincent hated being laid up, hated feeling useless, but he bore it with as much grace as he could muster. "I am supposed to be taking care of you," he grumbled one afternoon when Rose brought him lunch in bed. "Not the other way around." "Marriage is taking care of each other," Rose said firmly, settling onto the edge of the bed with her own plate. "You have taken care of me for 26 years, Vincent Cole. Let me return the favor." 26 years, Vincent said wonderingly. "Has it really been that long?" 26 years this November, Rose confirmed, "and I would do it all again every single day." Vincent reached for her hand, careful not to jostle his injured leg. "Rose, I need to tell you something, just in case. Do not talk like that. Hear me out," Vincent said gently. "I am not planning on going anywhere, but a man my age with a broken leg, well, things can happen. And if they do, I need you to know that these years with you have been the best years of my life. You took a lonely cowboy and gave him everything he never knew he needed. You gave me a home, a family, and a love that has sustained me through every trial. If I died tomorrow, I would die the happiest man who ever lived." Tears streamed down Rose's face, and she leaned down to kiss him fiercely. "You are not dying tomorrow or any time soon, do you hear me? We have got grandchildren to spoil and years left to spend together. So you heal up and get back on your feet, because I am not ready to say goodbye." "Yes, madam," Vincent said with a small smile. "Whatever you say." True to the doctor's predictions, the bone healed cleanly, and by December, Vincent was up and moving around with the help of a cane. He would always walk with a slight limp after that, and he could no longer do some of the more strenuous ranch work, but he was alive, and that was what mattered. Thomas had stepped fully into the role of running the ranch, and Vincent transitioned into more of an advisory position, offering guidance and wisdom earned from decades of experience. The scare with Vincent's injury made them both more aware of their mortality, of the fact that their time together, while precious, was not infinite. They began to make plans for the future, ensuring that the ranch would be well cared for and that their children and grandchildren would be provided for. Vincent drew up a will with the help of a lawyer from Panguitch, dividing the property fairly between Thomas and Emily, with provisions for Rose to remain on the ranch for as long as she lived. But more than the practical preparations, they focused on cherishing each day they had together. They took walks when the weather was good, Vincent leaning on his cane while Rose held his other arm. They watched sunsets from the porch, played with their grandchildren, and spent quiet evenings by the fire talking about their lives and memories. On their 30th wedding anniversary in November of 1912, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Neighbors from miles around came to celebrate, bringing food and well wishes. Rose wore a new dress that Emily had made for her, and Vincent wore his best suit, the same one he had worn to their wedding 30 years earlier. It still fit, though it was a bit snug in places. Thomas stood up to make a toast, raising his glass high. "I want to thank my parents for showing me and Emily what real love looks like. My father once paid $42.30 to free my mother from a terrible situation, and folks said he was a fool for spending his money on a stranger. But I think it was the smartest investment any man ever made, because in freeing her, he found his own freedom too. He found love and family and a life worth living. So here is to 30 more years, and to the kind of love that changes the world, one life at a time." Everyone cheered and drank, and Rose felt tears sliding down her cheeks once again. She had cried more tears of joy in the past 30 years than she had cried tears of sorrow in all the years before, and she considered that a good trade. As the party continued around them, Vincent pulled Rose into a quiet corner of the house. "I've got something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Vincent, you did not need to get me anything. This party is more than enough." "Just open it," he said with a smile, pressing a small wrapped package into her hands. Rose unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with her initials. Inside, Vincent had written on the first page in his careful script, "For Rose, whose story deserves to be told. Write it down, all of it, so our grandchildren and their children will know where they came from and what real love looks like." "Oh, Vincent," Rose whispered, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "You have always loved to write," Vincent said. "I remember how you used to write letters to Emily when she first moved to town, how you would spend hours getting the words just right. Write our story, Rose. Write it so nobody ever forgets." That night, after the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Rose sat at the kitchen table with the journal open in front of her. She picked up her pen and began to write. She wrote about being traded for a bag of flour, about the cowboy who had walked into that trading post and changed her life. She wrote about fear and hope, about learning to trust and learning to love. She wrote about building a life from nothing, about children and grandchildren, about 30 years of marriage to the best man she had ever known. She wrote for hours, the words flowing like water, and when she finally set down her pen, she felt lighter somehow. This was her story, her life, and it was worth recording. Not because she was anyone special or important, but because every life had value, every story mattered. Vincent had taught her that all those years ago, and she had never forgotten. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. Vincent's limp grew more pronounced, and eventually he needed a wheelchair for longer distances. Rose's own health began to decline, arthritis making her hands stiff and painful. But they adapted, finding new ways to do the things they loved, new ways to be together. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The ranch house was bursting with people, 3 generations of family that Vincent and Rose had created together. As Rose looked around at all those faces, at the love and laughter that filled their home, she thought about that terrified girl in the trading post and marveled at how far she had come. Vincent lived to see his 75th birthday, surrounded by family and friends. But in the spring of 1925, he caught pneumonia after being caught in a late-season storm while checking on the cattle. Despite the doctor's best efforts and Rose's constant care, his body was simply too worn down to fight off the infection. He died on a sunny May morning with Rose holding his hand, his children and grandchildren gathered around his bed. "You were worth more than all the gold out west," Vincent whispered with his last breath, his eyes locked on Rose's face. "Every penny, every moment, you were worth it all." Rose held him as he slipped away, her tears falling on his weathered face. She had known this day would come eventually, had tried to prepare herself for it. But nothing could have prepared her for the crushing weight of losing the man who had been her partner, her love, her whole world for over 40 years. They buried Vincent on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a tall cottonwood tree that he had loved. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Utah, people coming from miles around to pay their respects to a man who had lived with integrity and kindness. Rose stood at the graveside, supported by Thomas on one side and Emily on the other, and listened as the preacher spoke about Vincent's life and legacy. After the funeral, Rose returned to the ranch house that felt suddenly too quiet, too empty without Vincent's presence. She sat in his chair by the fireplace, wrapped in one of his old shirts that still smelled faintly of him, and allowed herself to grieve. For days, she barely ate or spoke, lost in the overwhelming sorrow of loss. But gradually, with the gentle persistence of her children and the demanding needs of the grandchildren, Rose began to emerge from her grief. She would never stop missing Vincent, would carry that ache in her chest until the day she died. But she also carried 42 years of love, of memories, of a life well lived together. And that, she realized, was something to celebrate rather than just mourn. Rose lived for another 7 years after Vincent's death, years filled with family and quiet contentment. She finished writing the journal that Vincent had given her, filling every page with stories of their life together. She taught her great-grandchildren to bake bread, told them stories about the old days, and made sure they knew about the cowboy who had paid $42.30 to free their great-grandmother from bondage. On a warm November evening in 1932, exactly 50 years after she had married Vincent Cole, Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 71. She was buried next to Vincent on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the cottonwood tree, where they could rest together forever. At the reading of Rose's will, Thomas and Emily discovered that she had left her journal to the entire family, with instructions that it be read aloud to each new generation. She had also left a letter, sealed and addressed to all her descendants, both present and future. Emily opened the letter with shaking hands and read aloud to the gathered family. To my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and all who come after. I was once traded for a bag of flour by a father who saw me as a burden rather than a blessing. I spent the first 19 years of my life believing I was worthless, that my existence was a mistake, that I would never amount to anything. And then, a cowboy named Vincent Cole walked into a trading post and paid $42.30 for my freedom. He told me I was worth more than all the gold out west, and he spent the next 42 years proving it. This is what I want you to know. Every person has worth. Every life has value. It does not matter where you come from, what mistakes you have made, or how others have treated you. You are deserving of love, respect, and dignity simply because you exist. Vincent taught me that, and it changed everything. Build your lives on love, not fear. Treat others with kindness and respect. Stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. And remember that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought or sold. They can only be given freely from one heart to another. I was traded for a bag of flour, but I lived like a queen because I was loved by a good man. May you all be so blessed. With all my love, Rose Cole. There was not a dry eye in the room when Emily finished reading. The journal and letter became treasured family heirlooms, passed down through generations along with the ranch that Vincent and Rose had built together. Their story became legend in southern Utah, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But for those who had known them, who had witnessed the quiet dignity of their love and the legacy they had created, there was nothing mythical about it at all. It was simply the story of two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over fear, kindness over cruelty, and who had built something lasting in a harsh and unforgiving land. The ranch remained in the Cole family for over a century, each generation adding their own chapter to the story that Vincent and Rose had begun. And on that hill, overlooking the property, under the old cottonwood tree, two headstones stood side by side. One read, Vincent Cole, 1858–1925, beloved husband, father, and friend. He saw worth where others saw none. The other, Rose Lancaster Cole, 1861–1932, beloved wife, mother, and friend. She taught us all what it means to be free. And there they rested together, the cowboy and the woman he had saved, their love story complete and their legacy living on in the family they had created and the lives they had touched. From tragedy and desperation, they had built something beautiful. From $42.30, they had created a fortune that could never be measured in gold. They had found what truly mattered in the wild and unforgiving American West: love, family, and the knowledge that every person is worth more than all the gold in the world.